The stench of old hay and grease hung thick in the crowded auction barn at Hexham Mart. It was an early Saturday in late April, and tense anticipation buzzed over the chipped wooden benches. Northumberland's ranchers leaned against metal railings, rubbing worn hands or subtly straightening tweed jackets, their voices a current of gossip and gruff laughter. Lady Amelia Kingsley, in her battered barber coat, stuck out like a storm cloud moving across a spring meadow. She walked with the measured steps of someone who'd led soldiers to safety, her gaze fixed and a generally unbothered air about her, though inside she was wound tighter than a clock. On her right trailed Lottie, arms crossed, dark hair slipping from her ponytail, defiant. Her eyes scanned the crowd, not so much with shyness as with clear disdain for everything rural and everyone in it. A plump auctioneer with a tweed hat banging his gavel pronounced, "Next up, Lot 11, Bramble, Shire gelding, 10 years, 1 eye, spirited if unconventional." The barn's laughter was instant. "Car boot," someone jeered, voice echoing off the tin roof. Another shouted, "Better off as dog food." Amelia bristled. A flash of hurt crossed her face, but she pushed forward. In the pen, Bramble looked every inch the unwanted. Huge, dark, ragged, his left eye scarred shut, his coat matted from months of neglect, a ghost of what he might have once been, but undeniably alive. He trembled as a boy prodded him with a stick for show, feet scrabbling on the slatted floor. "Go on, then," sneered a corpulent man next to Amelia. "Do you fancy a project, lady?" She ignored him. Surreptitiously, she slid her hand to her purse, feeling for her checkbook, a gesture Lottie caught and immediately rebelled against. "You're not really doing this, are you?" Lottie hissed. "Dad would never." Amelia flinched, but kept her gaze locked straight ahead. The auctioneer droned, "Start at 50? Silence. 40? This is a working Shire." Faint snickers rolled through the barn like an oncoming tide. Lottie stepped closer, voice lower. "Mom, please, we don't need another broken thing." Amelia paused, sensing not just Lottie's words, but the dozens of eyes now locked on her, measuring her dignity, her pride, her right to stand here. One man tossed a plastic cup at the pen gate, making Bramble flinch hard, nearly stumbling. The crowd's laughter spiked. That was it. Amelia raised her hand. 40, she said, clear and steady. The barn was instantly silent. For an impossible moment, an endless, drawn-out heartbeat, no one moved. Then people roared in disbelief or mockery. The auctioneer, too stunned to hide his glee, slammed the gavel. "Sold to the Lady Kingsley, £40." Ripples of laughter broke out, savage and delighted. Lottie, mortified, face red, spun away to hide her trembling chin. "What the hell, Mom?" she spat. Amelia faced her daughter, jaw set. "We have an empty stable and feed to spare." Lottie turned her back, tears stinging her eyes, not wanting to betray hope nor disappointment. A cluster of local teenagers filmed the scene, one muttering that this was peak Kingsley weirdness. The clip would be on Instagram before the hour was out. When Amelia reached Bramble, the horse recoiled, legs shaking. She placed her hand gently on his neck, whispering, "Easy, soldier," as she had to so many broken things before. The horse's only good eye rolled toward her, suspicious, but for a moment the trembling paused. Lottie watched from a distance, hands balled in her hoodie pocket, unsure if she wanted her mother to succeed or fail. Things got tenser as Sir Oliver Grant's glossy Land Rover rolled by the pens. The new local magnate, with Miles, his stony-faced son behind the wheel, shouted mockingly, "Nice catch, Lady Kingsley. What's next, a three-legged goat?" Miles, phone raised, zoomed in on Lottie, who turned away in disgust. Several older ranchers snorted, but Amelia maintained her composure. It was not for them she acted. She arranged for the stable boys to load Bramble into her old battered trailer, its Kingsley Manor crest now faded and peeling. On the way out of the parking lot, a rival landowner, Mrs. Harwood, cornered Amelia. "What will you do if Bramble causes trouble? He's unpredictable, you know." Amelia met her eyes calmly. "The world is full of unpredictable things. Doesn't mean we throw them away." Driving home through the moors, wind thumping at the car, Lottie sat stonily in the passenger seat. "Was this for me or for you?" she asked, mask of indifference barely hiding her confusion. Amelia didn't answer directly. Sometimes you give something a chance because nobody else will, because maybe, just maybe, that's how things change. Her left hand, bandaged from an old accident, rested on the steering wheel. Later, as they trundled up the gravel drive of Kingsley Manor, Bramble stamped in the trailer, uneasy. Storm clouds gathered, making the old estate bathe in gray twilight even in mid-afternoon. Amelia, bone-tired but determined, realized saving a horse was the easy part. The real fight was about to begin, both with the animal and her daughter. Inside, the kitchen smelled faintly of tea and liniment. On the fridge, an eviction notice for overdue taxes edged beneath the child's old drawing of a castle in brighter days. As Amelia and Lottie helped Bramble from the trailer, the old Shire bucked, yanking the lead from Lottie's hand. He crashed into the paddock's fence, splintering a rail. Lottie screamed, "He's crazy!" Amelia gritted her teeth, shoving her pain aside, and together they boxed in the horse, adrenaline flooding every limb. It was that moment, lying in straw, dirt smeared across her face, Lottie yelling accusations, Bramble wild and terrified, that Lady Amelia realized the battle lines weren't just about a horse, or land, or even money. It was a family splintered by loss, a village refusing to see worth in anything scarred or strange, and a stubborn, thin thread of hope refusing to snap. Above them, as the first fat drops of rain began to fall, the bells in the distant church tower rang. The world suddenly felt all teeth, and the fight for Bramble, for Kingsley Manor, and for the uneasy stillness between mother and daughter had only just begun. The wind rose up with a ghost scream over the old fields of Kingsley Manor as dusk fell. Clouds slammed across the Northumberland sky, bruised and tight, low enough to brush the tips of the ancient oaks. Rain battered the roof in erratic bursts, and the scent of wet grass, mud, and distant electricity seeped in through every crack and seam. The kitchen windows rattled, the lights flickered, then steadied. It was supposed to be a quiet night, just Amelia, her battered left shoulder still throbbing from years of use, putting the kettle on while Lottie sulked over muted TikTok videos in the front room. The air between them was as thick as the storm. Bramble, their newly acquired Shire horse, stamped restlessly in the stable, the heavy wood groaning under his weight. A violent gust sent a garbage bin tumbling down the gravel drive, and something crashed against the side of the barn. Both mother and stepdaughter startled. They heard the old fence groan, then snap. "That's the paddock," Amelia said, barely above a whisper, but her voice held command. No hesitation, she grabbed an oilskin and shrugged into rubber boots. Lottie, stubborn at first, caught the edge of panic in Amelia's expression and trailed behind, shoes slapping on kitchen tile. Rain stung as they dashed into the yard, flashlights swinging wild circles of pale yellow across the mud. The wind was so strong it sent grit flying, sharp as needles against their cheeks. The paddock gate hung crooked, swinging in the gale. A section of ancient fence lay torn open, rails snapped like brittle bones. Bramble was nowhere to be seen in his stall. Panic flashed through Amelia. She moved with military decisiveness, motioning Lottie to flank the stable from the side. The door was wedged. She gave it a shove with her good shoulder, teeth grit. Inside, the darkness swallowed their light. Bramble, wild-eyed, had managed to wedge himself in a corner, sides heaving, neck arched, one massive hoof caught under the dropped metal feed trough. Lottie's breath sped, fogging the chill air. "He's going to break his leg," she shouted, voice just audible over the roar outside. Amelia pressed her hand to Bramble's trembling shoulder. He was all muscle, panic, the smell of wet hair and old wounds. "Hold the light steady," Amelia snapped, but tried to soften her tone. "We need to shift the trough." Lightning flashed, making all their shadows lurch and stagger on the walls. A second later, thunder crashed, sharp enough to shake dust from the rafters. Bramble jerked, nostrils flared, that single good eye rolling white. Lottie trembled, but held her ground, glare shifting between the horse and her stepmother. They worked, shoulder to flank, Amelia soothing with a war nurse's low hum, Lottie biting her lip, shoving at cold, rusted metal. The ground was a slurry. Every inch the trough moved cost bruises and splinters. Wind forced the barn doors open with a bang, sending hay swirling. The flashlight slipped from Lottie's hand, spinning in the muck, casting wild ghouls on the walls. Bramble let out a deep bellow, almost a scream. For one terrifying moment, it seemed he'd rear and come crashing down on both of them. Amelia's injured arm gave out. A sharp, sick pain shot through her shoulder, and she dropped to her knees. Lottie lunged, surprisingly strong, bracing herself against Bramble's chest, fear forgotten in adrenaline. "Mom, watch out!" she cried. The trough finally shifted. Bramble yanked his leg free, stumbling sideways into Amelia, who tried to cushion his fall with her body. They both hit the straw, mud grinding into Amelia's coat and seeping up under her sleeve. For a second, everything was just chaos. Clattering hooves, muffled sobs, rain clashing against metal so loudly it was almost silence in their ears. But as Bramble found his feet, Lottie, shaken, grabbed the halter. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Amelia, winded but unbroken, pulled herself upright and tried to catch her breath. "Open the side gate now," she barked, praying the structure would hold. They staggered together, half dragging, half guiding Bramble into the smaller tack room. Flashlight beams caught glimpses of Lottie's face, muddy and tear-tracked, bottom lip trembling. "Why do you always do this?" she spat, not at the horse, but her stepmother, all the weight of resentment compressed into those words. Amelia, hair soaked to her scalp, met Lottie's glare but said nothing. Bramble, wild a moment before, now leaned heavy against her good shoulder, exhausted. The storm roared on. Power flickered, then died, plunging the world into utter black save for lightning staccato. The three of them, woman, girl, and horse, huddled inside the cold makeshift shelter. A toolbox crashed somewhere behind them, lost in the dark. Lottie was crying now, softly, hands shaking as she stroked Bramble's mane. "He's going to die here," she whispered. "So will we at this rate." "No," Amelia said, fiercely gentle, "not tonight." With stiff fingers, she scrounged in her pocket for a handful of oats, holding it under Bramble's nose. The horse took it, slow and suspicious. Lottie watched, wary, but then, almost against her will, reached up and guided Bramble's head down. Together, the three exhaled. A distant tree cracked and fell with a boom. The wind seemed to let up just a fraction. Lottie wiped her face. "You could have just let him go," she said, voice both accusation and apology. Amelia shook her head, wincing. Sometimes keeping hold is the hardest thing. In the uncertain dark, they stayed, watching water drip through a beam, listening to Bramble's trembling breaths even out, the storm's fury rolling further down the valley. When the power finally and suddenly snapped back, it brought only the thin, artificial comfort of light. Lottie tested her voice. "Is that it? Just keep fighting till it passes?" Amelia shrugged, tenderness and exhaustion mingling in her smile. "It's always passing and always coming. That's all we can do." The storm would leave its scars, in the split fence, in the bruises on both their arms, in Bramble's shaken trust. But so would this moment in the dark barn, Three lost creatures refusing to let go, not just of each other, but of hope, however battered or hard to see. A dirty haze clung to the low land behind Kingsley Manor, the kind that makes every sound sharper and every movement more delicate in the quiet morning after a storm. The battered stable was heavy with the scent of wet straw, liniment, and the metallic tang of fear that still lingered after last night's chaos. Every joint in Lady Amelia Kingsley's body seemed to grind with ache as she rose, determined not to let pain set the agenda for the day. Her left arm was wrapped tight against her ribs with a faded scarf, homemade field medicine, the same style she'd used years ago in Afghanistan. She did not let herself contemplate hospitals or rest. Instead, she measured out oats with her right hand, boiling water for mash. The room was gray-blue and silent, but for the soft whir of the old kettle and the pop of logs in the kitchen hearth. Amelia worked around the aches, humming fragments of an old military march that settled her nerves. She spooned the gruel into a battered enamel pan. Outside the kitchen window, Bramble shifted and stamped in the muddy paddock, wary but upright. He eyed the world with one eye, head down, tail flicking at persistent rain. His sides heaved, but no longer with blind panic. He was battered, not beaten. Amelia felt a wary kinship with him. Both had faced storms. Both had survived. Both would carry the evidence for a while yet. Lottie was up too, though she moved like a shadow, silent, quick, careful not to draw attention. She paused in the doorway, sketchbook tucked under one arm, studying Amelia for a long moment. There was a new wariness in her, a kind of quiet awe mingled with the dregs of last night's fear. She said nothing at first, but lingered by the counter watching her stepmother stir the oats. Amelia noticed, but did not comment. Instead, she poured the thick mush into a pail and, with an awkward one-handed motion, set out for the barn. The air smelled of earth and old leaves, and every step squelched through sticky mud as she crossed the yard. Lottie watched from the kitchen, fingers absently tracing the wire binding of her sketchbook, eyes tracking every move. Bramble caught Amelia's scent as she neared, ears flicking forward, muscles tense. But as she spoke, soft, even, not coaxing but factual, he stilled just enough for her to approach. Bits of straw clung to his dark hide. A fresh gash on his flank oozed but was drying fast. When Amelia slid the pail beneath his scarred muzzle, the horse stiffened, then relaxed, lips searching the warm mash with cautious hunger. Amelia leaned up against the paddock fence, careful not to jar her bad arm, and closed her eyes as Bramble ate. The sun, weak but determined, forced its way through the clouds, dappling the yard with rays. For a moment, everything was still. The only sounds were the rhythm of Bramble's jaw and a distant crow calling from the wood. Behind her, the old gate creaked. Lottie slipped outside, sketchbook clutched close. She sat on the top step and started to draw. Quick lines, nervous but intent. She didn't speak, didn't ask for permission, just observed the silent pact between woman and horse from a distance. Amelia caught the glance, but pretended not to notice, sensing that interruption would shatter the fragile peace. A little after 8, Mr. Ralph Byrne made his way up the drive. He was a tall, silver-haired man with the straight posture of a career soldier and the kind of hands that spoke of decades spent around horses. His battered Land Rover spat gravel as he parked off to the side. Amelia raised a hand in greeting and, without a word, Byrne joined her at the fence. Boots squelching, face gentle. "I heard yelling last night," Byrne said, voice low and careful. "Thought you might need a hand." He examined Bramble with an expert eye, noting the tremble in the horse's muscles and the shape of new scars. "You've got yourself a project, Lady Kingsley." Amelia shrugged. "Sometimes projects are all that stand between you and despair." Bramble snorted, as if in agreement. Byrne chuckled, pulling a faded sugar cube from his coat pocket and holding it out. Bramble, emboldened by hunger, and perhaps by the soft cadence of storytelling, leaned in, lips working over Byrne's hand. Amelia let herself lean against the fence at ease, the pain in her shoulder now merely background. Lottie, sensing a change in the rhythm, drifted closer, still drawing. Byrne caught her eye. "You draw horses?" he asked gently. Lottie hesitated, then turned her sketchbook slightly so he could see. Rough lines, yes, but alive with tension, movement, and a kind of understanding that surprised herself. Byrne smiled. "You know, in the cavalry, you could tell the best riders by how they sketched their mounts. Not the prettiest drawings, but the truest." Lottie blushed, not quite sure how to take the compliment. She looked at her stepmother, who smiled, a rare, unguarded moment of approval. The world felt changed, not fixed, not even healed, but changed. Byrne told them stories from years back, of war horses in France, the Royal Cavalry, the first Shire stallion he'd ever ridden. He spoke of loyalty, of scars, and of trust rebuilt with patience and oats. His words lingered in the morning light, weaving a fragile net over the battered stable-yard. Bramble's head drooped by degrees, Amy's aches eased, and Lottie's pencil glided with growing confidence. For a while, they stayed like that, 3 generations bound not by blood, but by the hope that a handful of gentle moments could begin to mend greater wounds. In the hush beneath the soft rise of Northumberland moor, where nothing seemed easy, but everything still felt possible, this fragile family found its first, precious quiet. If you'd been in the fields behind Kingsley Manor that April afternoon, you might have thought nothing much had changed after the storm. The clouds floated higher, the grass held on to last night's rain, and the old stone house stood as solid as ever in the pale northern sun. Yet everything felt different to Amelia. The silence between her and Lottie was no longer chilly or sharp. It was something softer, a pause that welcomed rather than warned. Lottie sat in the grass with her knees drawn to her chest, a battered copy of Byron's poetry cracked open in her lap. Her head was bent, dark hair falling forward as she read aloud to the wind and to herself, her voice low, careful, stumbling sometimes but never giving up. A few yards away, Bramble grazed. He was a daunting shape, huge, dark, and scarred, but now he moved more easily, his flanks rising gently as he breathed in the new sunlight. The old stories say that animals know the truth of things before people do. Lottie, for all her bravado, still half believed it. She glanced up at Bramble, checking to see if he was paying attention. The horse's one good eye flicked toward her voice. She turned the page, found the lines she liked best, and read them in a steady, clear tone that surprised even her. "There is pleasure in the pathless woods. There is rapture on the lonely shore. There is society where none intrudes, by the deep sea and music in its roar." Bramble inched closer. Lottie froze. She could feel her heart bash in her chest, a wild drumbeat that dared her to stay put. She didn't reach out, didn't coax, she just kept reading. The world grew quieter. Even the birds seemed to hush, waiting. It happened slowly. Bramble lowered his head, the battered leather halter creaking. He sniffed near Lottie's elbow, hesitant. She barely breathed. Then, bold as a king and gentle as rain, Bramble used his soft mouth to nudge her open palm. The same hand that had thrown buckets in anger, drawn angry black horses in her sketchbook, and, until now, had always pulled away. His whiskers tickled her skin. Lottie inhaled sharply, and a shaky laugh escaped, breaking the spell. From a few steps back, Amelia watched everything. She'd come out to check the paddock's repairs, but stopped when she saw her stepdaughter and Bramble. If she moved, she might break the moment. So she stayed, half-hidden, eyes stinging for no reason she'd ever admit. Lottie's face lit up. Not a practiced grin for Snapchat, but something softer, almost unguarded. "Hey, you like poetry, Bramble?" she asked, giving him a tentative scratch behind the ear. The horse stood still, then blinked, head bowed, as if in answer. She read him another stanza, steadier this time. Amelia leaned back against the fence post, letting the relief seep into her bones. For once, her thoughts weren't running ahead to money troubles or threats of losing the land. Today, she let herself believe this might be the start of something more. The wind shifted and carried Lottie's voice, clear, sure, a voice she hadn't heard in months. Suddenly, a distant shout broke the spell. Miles Grant and his friends, out on their bikes, rattled by on the farm track, calling out, "Still playing with broken toys, Lottie?" His laughter shot like a pebble across the water. Lottie stiffened, but didn't rise to the bait, not this time. She just pressed her palm calmly to Bramble's broad nose, and the horse stepped closer, sheltering her. Miles slowed his bike, confusion flickering across his face, then sped off, missing the point entirely. Bramble's trust was a fragile thing, a gift, not a prize to be seized. Amelia finally crossed the field, not too fast, careful not to spook either horse or girl. "You got through to him," she said, softly when Lottie looked up. Lottie shrugged quickly, trying to hide her pride. Her fingers stayed tangled in Bramble's mane. "He just likes the sound of poems, or maybe he gets sick of everyone yelling." "That's more than most people understand," Amelia answered, kneeling beside them despite the warning twinge in her shoulder. They sat together in a peace that didn't require words. Lottie began sketching Bramble directly now, the thick neck, the scarred line across his eye, then adding her own smile next to the horse's unmoving calm. Amelia watched, amazed at the lines her stepdaughter drew, rough, trembling in places, but full of life and hope. A kestrel dipped low over the fields. A breeze rustled the grass in gentle waves. For the first time since she arrived in this cold stone world, Lottie let herself laugh without shame. There was an invisible thread now, running from her to Bramble, and, though she wouldn't say it out loud, to Amelia too. Each felt it, that rare, precious thing that sometimes springs between survivors who finally see each other not as burdens, but as companions. If you'd wandered by the old Kingsley Manor that afternoon, you might not have noticed anything special. But to those in the field, girl, horse, and the woman watching, the whole world seemed to briefly open its arms. Something unbroken and full of promise had finally taken root. The morning started awkward and ordinary, with cool gray clouds slipping across the Northumberland sky and birds just beginning their quarrels in the hedgerows. Amelia tried not to think about bills gathering dust on the kitchen table or the ache in her shoulder, instead moving through habitual chores, coffee, radio, checking on Bramble. She didn't notice anything wrong at first. The paddock looked the same, dew heavy on the fence rails, the air tinged with spring and old hay. Lottie hovered at the edge of the yard, sketchbook against her hip, her face showing a hint of the fragile trust that had been building between her and Amelia since the storm. Then Bramble stumbled. It was subtle, one heavy hoof catching in mud, a strange wobble in his step. Amelia's years in triage kicked in. She dropped her coffee, racing across the yard as Bramble's massive head dipped, froth bubbling suddenly at the corners of his mouth. He lurched, grinding against the rail. Lottie's breath hitched, the fear in her voice sharp and real. Is he choking? Amelia's hands found Bramble's neck, feeling the frantic thud of his heart. His sides heaved. The horse's eyes, one scarred, the other wide, searched for comfort. "No, not choking," Amelia muttered, her mind racing. "Something's wrong." She waved Lottie back, her body moving by instinct and muscle memory. "Call Eleanor, now. Tell her it's urgent." Lottie, shaking, sprinted for the house and the phone. In the gap between ambulance calls and barn emergencies, time can seem to move twice as fast and twice as slow. Bramble's legs buckled, his skin twitching along his flanks. For one terrifying moment, Amelia thought she would lose him right there in the mud. The trust she'd fought so hard to earn snuffed out like a match in fog. By the time Eleanor Sharp arrived, sweat glistened on Bramble's coat and the foaming at his mouth had worsened. Eleanor, calm and precise, checked the horse's gums, peered down his throat, and sniffed his breath. "This is poisoning," she announced grimly, pulling out a syringe. "I need you both to keep him upright, keep him moving if you can." "What kind of poisoning?" Amelia demanded, heart in her throat. Eleanor knelt by Bramble's trough, sniffed, then scooped up a handful of grain. Mixed with the golden oats were pellets, greenish, sharp-smelling, distinctly unnatural. Rat poison, mixed in the feed probably last night. Her eyes darted to Amelia's, then to Lottie, whose hands had balled into fists. "You didn't do this by accident." Lottie's voice was barely a whisper. "Of course not. Who'd want to?" But the words never finished. Both she and Amelia knew. The fence had been broken last week. Kids daring each other to sneak around the stables. Neighbors already suspicious of the crazy Kingsley women and that broken horse. Eleanor got to work, dosing Bramble with charcoal and injections, murmuring steady reassurances that felt both professional and maternal. Lottie sat on the straw outside the paddock, arms tucked tight around her knees. Her eyes tracked every movement. Amelia, jaw clenched, checked and rechecked the pasture, searching for clues, rage percolating under fear. Outside their little drama, the news moved fast in Anwick. By noon, the school's WhatsApp group was buzzing. Sir Oliver's son, Miles, had gone live on Instagram, holding up his phone with a sneer. "Look at the disaster at Kingsley Manor. Their ugly horse is sick, probably a danger to the community if you ask me. Someday the council's going to put down every broken thing on that estate." Comments flashed up, memes, jokes, and a few notes of sympathy lost in the flood of derision. Someone spliced in shots of Bramble stumbling, his breath ragged, over top with Miles' laughter. You could almost chart the town's division by how they responded. Some, like Mr. Byrne, turned up quietly after lunch, offering help, their faces grave. Others stopped calling, or stopped making eye contact when they passed in the market. The net effect was a weird rolling pressure, an invisible accusation blending suspicion and old-fashioned spite. The worst part for Amelia wasn't the poison or the threat of council investigation. It was watching Lottie sit, motionless, as Bramble fought to breathe. Her stepdaughter's faith, painstakingly rebuilt over days, flickered like a candle in a draft. "Mom, what if he doesn't make it?" she murmured, not angry, just desperate. Amelia squeezed Lottie's shoulder. "He's got us. That's more than he had before. Bramble's a fighter. You saw him survive worse than this." But the words tasted false, even as she said them. That evening, a crowd formed outside their gate, some faces familiar, some drawn by rumor. Sir Oliver, his tweed jacket immaculate, stood at the head, arms folded, voice carrying above the wind. "It's about time the council addresses this. Dangerous animals, dangerous people. It's not just about property anymore. Safety is everyone's concern." Amelia faced them in her mud-caked boots, her voice unflinching. "If anyone here has proof of wrongdoing, you bring it to me directly. Otherwise, let us do our best to care for what's been harmed." Her eyes met Oliver's. Neither blinked. Inside, Bramble's breathing finally eased. He stood, neck lowered, resting against the stall door. Eleanor set down her bag and shook her head. Relief obvious, but cautious. "He'll need rest, and you'll need proof. Keep every scrap of the poisoned grain. I'll file a report." Lottie lingered by the horse's side, her small hand running gently down Bramble's battered neck. "Don't give up yet," she whispered, her voice fierce if small. "That's what they want." Night fell over Kingsley Manor, heavy and slow, draping the battered family in fear, anger, and the thin protection of their stubbornness. They had become, for better or worse, the center of a fight neither had chosen, but both had to see through. By midnight, as Bramble snored softly and Lottie finally dozed, Amelia looked out into the dark beyond the yard. Somewhere in the fields, anger was festering. Hers, yes, but also that of neighbors who saw survival itself as a threat. She drew the curtains, checked the locks, and braced herself for whatever storm would come next. The air inside the Anwick Council Hall felt heavy, every echo off the stone floor sharpened by tension. No wind from the moors could reach here. The place was thick with the smell of polished wood, damp coats, and the nervous sweat of an audience waiting for spectacle. All eyes turned as Lady Amelia Kingsley entered, her old tweed coat pressed hard against her shoulders, boots still mud-stained from dawn chores. At her side walked Bramble, neck swaddled with a bandage, his scarred face stoic under the harsh indoor lights. Lottie moved just behind, clutching her phone tight, her jaw set like she was bracing against cannon fire. The meeting was packed. Farmers in fleeces, retirees from tidy hill cottages, police in high-vis jackets, a handful of bored teens scrolling on their screens. At the head of the long table sat Sir Oliver Grant, the picture of rural authority, silk tie gleaming under the lamps. He barely looked at Amelia as he shuffled papers, but his voice cut across the room, cold and rehearsed. "I move that the council consider immediate removal of Lady Kingsley's livestock on grounds of public safety and recent incidents involving poisoning and alleged threats to the community." His words sent a murmur through the crowd. The local vicar twisted his collar uneasily. Mrs. Harwood, her gray bun as tight as her lips, whispered, "It's for the best, dear. No one can trust a wild animal or the woman who keeps him." Miles sat 2 rows behind his father, arms crossed, face a mask of bored defiance. Amelia didn't flinch. Instead, she led Bramble to the front. Under the cold eyes of the council, she stood tall. "With respect, Sir Oliver, Bramble isn't the threat here. What happened was an act of malice, one meant to punish not just this horse, but anyone who refuses to be bullied off their land." Before Sir Oliver could cut her off, Lottie stepped forward, unlocking her phone with trembling hands. "May I speak?" Silence. The chair nodded, more out of procedure than genuine permission. With only a short look at her mother, Lottie flicked her phone's gallery open, projecting video to the screen behind the council. Static, then a clear shot. Grainy, rainy footage from last week's storm. The stable door left ajar in the night. It showed a figure half hidden under a hoodie hunched by the feed bin. A handful of pellets, unmistakably green, dropped into the grain. He looked up once, straight at the camera's security light, face half irritated. The profile was clear: Miles Grant. The room gasped. Sir Oliver's throat worked, his lips pale with shock. Miles jumped to his feet, voice cracking. That's..." His friends, faces suddenly maskless, looked away. For a moment, all the old rules of the town, the ones about who gets believed and who doesn't, hung in the balance. Lottie didn't gloat. She simply pressed play again, showing the bit where Miles's laughter carried in the wind, his voice clear even over the rain. "Bet that'll sort 'em out for good. Let's see them love their mascot tomorrow." Until now, no one in the room had dared say aloud what they suspected. But here, broadcast on council screens, was proof not only of malice, but intention. Whispers started, quiet, then louder. Mrs. Harwood, trembling, muttered, "It could have been a child." The school caretaker sat up straight, gaze icy on Miles. Sir Oliver struggled to recover. "This proves nothing. Those images are dark. Anyone." But Eleanor Sharp, the vet, pushed to her feet. "Sir Oliver, are you accusing a minor of falsifying evidence? Or do you think your son ought to be exempt from consequences?" A tense quiet fell. Lottie's knuckles were white around her phone. Amelia laid a steadying hand on her stepdaughter's back, pride and worry tangling in her eyes. "The truth isn't always comfortable, but it's ours now," she said, voice soft but unwavering. Council procedure sputtered to life, calls for a pause, requests to review the footage privately, murmurs of escalating things to police. The room did not empty out, but the mood shifted. Neighbors who'd avoided Amelia at the market now offered her nods, stiff but sincere. Anger at injustice, for once, outweighed fear of trouble. Outside, crowds poured onto the green, voices rising. Some in support, some demanding further explanation. Bramble stood perfectly still amid the crush. Lottie, relief and shock mingling, turned to Amelia. "Did I do the right thing?" she whispered. Amelia drew her quiet near. "Courage isn't about being ready. It's just about doing what's fair, even when it's ugly." Tears threatened, but she blinked fast, checking Bramble's bandage one last time as the vet murmured assurances. Miles tried to disappear into the crowd, but Sir Oliver's hand fell heavy on his shoulder. For the first time since his arrival in town, Sir Oliver looked truly lost. The council clerk, practical and bored until now, was on the phone to the police. By evening, the internet had exploded. Hashtags dividing the town anew, but now in defense of Kingsley Manor. Hashtag justice for Bramble trended. Stories of other times Miles had bullied classmates or threatened animals surfaced, retweeted by those who once stayed silent. When they finally returned to the manor, exhausted but unbowed, Amelia, Lottie, and Bramble walked up the lane under a navy sky full of scattered moonlight. Neighbors with lanterns tapped on their gate, some to apologize, some simply to say, "Well done." The tension wasn't gone, but it had changed shape, from isolation to fragile solidarity. They knew nothing would be simple from here. Nothing ever was. But when Bramble dipped his head for Lottie to scratch his scarred cheek, and when Amelia caught her stepdaughter smiling, even for a second, some of the weight of the past weeks, fear, shame, hurt, lifted a little. Inside, under the old beams and battered furniture, the family closed ranks against the dark, hearts pounding not from dread this time, but from the strange rush of hope that follows speaking a hard, necessary truth. The day began electric. A sharp, dry wind out of the east rattled the moorland grasses and set the hedgerows whispering. By noon, the sun was hard and white overhead, pressing the land flat with heat. There was a thrum of unease beneath every ordinary task. Even the birds moved shyly, as if aware of the tension twisting the air. Lottie and Amelia finished checking on Bramble, who had finally returned to rest, when the sharp metallic whine of distant sirens cleaved the day in two. Smoke rose first, thin and almost delicate, a pale smear over the hills near Hadrian's Wall. Then the fire revealed itself, hungry, fast, whirling orange across the grassland, unstoppable as wind. People shouted on the village green. Sir Oliver's voice snapped across the phone tree. "Evacuate the lower hill, flames are heading fast for the old line of the Roman road." A crackling voice from the fire service came next. "All hands, moorland fire, moving toward Kingsley Manor. No heroics, stay back." Within minutes, all routines broke. Lottie stood at the window, face blank in the orange half-light, her sketchbook forgotten. "We need to move him," she breathed, meaning Bramble. Amelia's heart pounded. She was already grabbing boots, a battered jacket, the emergency kit she once carried in Afghanistan. Flames traveled swift on the wind. By the time they reached the yard, neighbors had gathered, smoke blurring faces. Mr. Byrne dripping sweat as he helped old Mrs. Harwood down from her garden wall, kids wide-eyed and silent. In the kitchen, the radio spat half-formed warnings. More fire, unpredictable winds, Hadrian's Wall, possible property risk. Ash started to fall, light as confetti, settling onto Lottie's arms where she hovered near the back door. The stable was chaos. The smell of burning bracken already edged the air, sharp and toxic. Bramble, agitated by the heat and flicker and shadows, smashed his hooves against the gate, rearing and bucking with panic. For a moment, even Amelia wavered. He was a massive, wounded animal in full terror, hot foam flecking his muzzle. But the thought of leaving him to the flames was impossible. Lottie grabbed the heavy hammer from the tool chest and, with hands she couldn't seem to control, began attacking the jammed metal bar across the stall. "He's trapped!" she cried, sweat running down her brow, lungs searing with the thickening smoke. "Do something, Mom!" Her voice pulsed with desperation, part child and part young soldier. Through the haze, Amelia called out instructions, voice clipped and sure. "Hit the joint, not the bar. It's weaker there." She tried to soothe Bramble, reaching for his halter, murmuring, "Steady, steady now." The horse trembled, but as the bar gave, she managed to slip a rope over his head. Just then, a sharp crack. Half the stable roof splintered as some support collapsed, showering them in sparks and broken tiles. For the first time in months, Lottie didn't flinch. She drove the hammer again, the bar popped, and suddenly there was room for Bramble to thrash free. "Now!" Amelia roared. Lottie flung the door, and together they surged out into the swirling smoke. The wind howled up, carrying fire along the dry edge of the paddock. Ambulance lights flashed red against the gathering dusk. As they staggered across the yard, Bramble momentarily refused to move, paralyzed with fear. "He won't go! He's freezing!" Lottie gasped, coughing. Amelia dropped hard to her knees in the mud, grabbed the side of his bridle, and pressed her forehead to his. Old nurse meeting old soldier. Scared mother meeting scared child. "You have to trust me. One more mile, soldier. That's all," she murmured. A howl of wind sent fire arcing dangerously close, the crackle now a roar. With a final burst, Bramble moved, half dragged and half following. Amelia's bad arm gave out, and she nearly fell, but Lottie circled around, adding her weight and voice to the effort. Fences fell as they struggled up the side lane. The flames blanketed the moor behind them. The old Kingsley signpost smoldered and toppled. Firefighters, faces masked, suits gleaming orange, shouted for them to run clear. Sir Oliver, panic finally showing in his face rather than bluster, tried to herd villagers back, but most had already fled across the green toward safety. Lottie tripped once, skinning her knees, but never let go of Bramble's lead. In the thick of black smoke, she called out for her mother, voice hoarse but determined. Amelia, catching up, pulled them both into a ditch as a great burning bough crashed down, missing them by feet. In the swirling chaos, they were joined by Mr. Byrne, swinging a blanket, urgent but unshaken. "Got to smother his coat or he'll catch," he barked. And together the three worked, blanketing Bramble and leading him, stumbling, through a break in the fire line. Time compressed, every muscle burning, air hot and sharp as knives. As darkness fell, the fire lost its hunger, dying back under the relentless efforts of local fire crews and the sudden turn of wind. At last, on the far side of the ridge, with the manor standing battered but unburnt behind them, the three collapsed into the blackened grass, shaking and coughing, but alive. Firelight painted Amelia and Lottie's faces in raw relief and exhaustion. Bramble's sides heaved, but his one good eye found Lottie, and she let herself rest against his massive neck. Above them, a cold moon rose, silvering the ruins and charred fields. The danger had passed for now, but nothing of the old order remained. The scars, on land, on home, on the band of battle-forged trust, would linger, deeper and more real than ever before. In the darkness, as distant sirens faded and neighbors began to count the cost, Lottie whispered through cracked lips, "He never left us." Amelia squeezed her hand, the weight of survival pressing down, a mixture of pride, heartbreak, and fierce, painful hope for dawn. News of the fire and the heroics at Kingsley Manor spread through Anwick like morning light, slow at first, then all at once. Almost before the embers had cooled, the phone rang. a polite, careful voice from the Hopewell Equine Trust. Their director explained that someone on their staff had seen the footage of Bramble, the battered, one-eyed Shire who survived not just neglect and hate, but flames and flood. They wanted, if Lady Kingsley would allow, for Bramble to join a pilot program for trauma therapy, working alongside veterans and children on the spectrum who struggled to trust, connect, or even feel safe in their own bodies. Amelia listened quietly. There was fear in the offer, the worry of letting the world in, of Bramble being pushed too much. But beneath that, pride. She agreed on one strict condition: no spectacle, no viral miracle horse campaign. If he helps, let it be for them, not for the headlines, she said. The Hopewell director promised, heart and voice, that this would be about quiet change, not charity. It was only a week after the fire that the Hopewell van pulled up at dawn. Bramble loaded with surprising calm, glancing back just once at the manor gate. Lottie, struggling with nerves, traveled with him, sketchbook clutched to her chest. The trust grounds spread wide, tranquil after the tight, anxious lanes of Anwick, paddocks edged with young willows, stable blocks painted sky blue, laughter and music somewhere far off but gentle. The first veteran they met was Martin. He'd served 3 tours, lost friends to both IED blasts and the silent weight of memory. Martin's hands shook as he approached the field, refusing all staff help, even as the panic grew in his chest, his family anxiously watching from a distance. The horses, sensing the tension, shifted away down the paddock, except Bramble. Scars meeting scars, Bramble walked right up, slow, measured, never breaking Martin's line of sight. The veteran's breathing broke, legs braced for fight or flight. Bramble stopped within arm's reach, lowered his head, and pressed his scarred brow against Martin's chest. The world went very still. 1 minute passed, then another. Martin's panic ebbed. Tears rolled freely, unashamed, and when he finally spoke, it was only, "He knows." Not a trick, not coincidence, recognition across a boundary deeper than language. Social media, so often the engine of mockery, caught the moment by accident. A Hopewell volunteer filmed quietly, for internal records, Martin running shaky fingers through Bramble's rough mane, whispering thanks in the strange grammar of trauma and survival. The video leaked, and this time the reaction was different. Comments filled up with messages from other veterans, parents, folks who'd seen pain up close. "He's not beautiful, but look what he can do. Every scar matters. Bramble isn't broken, he's proof." In the week that followed, Bramble became, almost by accident, the heart of Hopewell's new group. He stood patient with the anxious kids, let them clamber, even as he flinched at sudden noises. A girl with selective mutism sat silently for an hour beside him. She spoke to no one, but drew Bramble over and over in vivid violet crayon. By the weekend, she whispered, "Stay," as he tried to leave her orbit. The staff exchanged astonished, relieved looks, small victories in a weary world. Lottie watched all of this, notebook ever present. She drew the real Bramble, the uneven lines of his legs, the magnet pull between trauma and trust, children's hands gentle in his tangled mane. For the first time, her sketches didn't hide how raw he was. She showed them to the kids, to Martin, and watched shy smiles bloom. Of course, not every day was simple. Some parents, those with perfect horses in glossy brochures, clucked at the thought of a charity using an ugly animal. Sir Oliver, catching wind of Bramble's new role, sniffed on social media that any program run by Kingsley must be questionable. But those voices faded against the flood of gratitude, the growing network of allies who saw what Bramble truly accomplished. No flash, just presence. One Friday, a little boy named Ethan, who flinched from every human touch, fell in the mud during a session. Everyone froze, afraid it would trigger a meltdown. Instead, Bramble, slow and watchful, nuzzled his shoulder, letting the boy grab hold of his mane to stand up. In that small gesture, the fierce old wounds, Those etched on Bramble, those hidden in the children, read each other. Healing wasn't quick, but for the first time, it felt possible. The story caught fire again, but now in a different way. The hashtag Bramble Heals climbed in the UK. Schools wrote to Hopewell for visits. Veterans signed up for the next session. Back in Anwick, even some of Bramble's oldest detractors began sending food or posting online, unable to argue with the evidence of gentle transformation. The council meetings, once battlegrounds, now asked, "Can Bramble come to our festival?" Amelia visited often, mostly standing back, letting children and soldiers crowd the fence. She watched as Lottie became a trusted hand at Hopewell, guiding frightened kids, sketching the scenes that would later stir donors and soften wary parents. For both women, it was the first time in years they saw their own hurts mirrored and soothed in someone else's courage. When Martin next found himself alone in Bramble's stall, he whispered thanks. No audience, no applause. Bramble flicked an ear and leaned in, one survivor steadying another. This, Amelia realized, wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't even about forgiveness or redemption, not really. It was about refusing to give up on the wounded, because wounded things often heal each other best. And in the simple warmth of Bramble's stall, as dusk rolled down over Hopewell Fields, a battered horse and a battered man rested together, proof that even those cast aside could become the heroes of someone else's story. There's a strange magnetism in imperfection, a silent pull that draws the battered and bruised to the hearts of those willing to look beyond surface wounds. In weeks following Bramble's rescue and his unlikely emergence as the soul of Hopewell's therapy program, word spread quickly, not just about a miracle horse, but about something deeper, harder, even uncomfortable for the town to face. Amelia found herself surprised by the number of letters and emails arriving at Kingsley Manor. Some were from grateful parents or veterans who'd spent an hour with Bramble and left lighter, more open. Others came from strangers across Britain, prompted by viral videos or news segments, bearing their own scars in careful handwriting. My daughter hasn't let anyone hug her in years, but she let Bramble rest his head on her lap. Your story made me realize I've spent years hiding my depression. Thank you for showing that scars, on beasts or people, do not define our worth. Now and then, Amelia would sit by the old hearth with Lottie snuggled under a blanket, both of them reading these notes. After fire and trial, the manor was still quiet, but inside it felt newly alive. "Why do you think people care so much, Mom?" Lottie asked one evening as rain pattered the windows. "It's like Brambles made everyone confess something." Amelia watched the logs shift in the grate before answering. "I think sometimes it takes something unmistakably wounded to make the rest of us admit we're not whole either." She looked at Lottie's hands, still bruised from the fire, still sketched with charcoal. Maybe people trust Bramble because he doesn't lie about what's hurt him. Word traveled beyond Anwick. Major British newspapers ran think pieces. A one-eyed horse is healing a divided community. BBC Radio 4 came to record a segment. But beneath headlines and viral hashtags, a more serious conversation took root. People began discussing equine therapy not as some whimsical rural trend, but as a legitimate vector for healing trauma. Psychologists quoted studies showing that horses, especially those marked by age or hardship, were as effective as standard counseling in reducing anxiety and depression in at-risk kids and PTSD sufferers. This, too, felt like a kind of reckoning for Anwick. Council members who had once jeered at the car boot horse now cited academic papers and suggested funding a local Bramble Sessions pilot for teens with behavioral difficulties. Some resisted, branding it sentimental. But it became harder for anyone to dismiss careful data and the photos of anxious children visibly relaxing as they touched Bramble's battered coat. Sir Oliver was nowhere to be seen at these meetings now. The Grant name had faded from local social media, replaced instead by quiet apologies or nervous silence. Others, though, filled the void. Retired nurses, teachers, even the shopkeeper who'd once refused Lottie's service, now stopping by the stall fence with a thermos of tea. One rainy weekend, the Hopewell director invited local journalists and skeptics to watch a live session. Cameras captured scenes more moving than any promotional campaign could engineer. An autistic teen who'd hidden behind headphones now whispering to Bramble about colors. A veteran in tears, holding the horse's halter as if steadying himself. Amelia lingered at the edge, refusing interviews, letting the evidence stand on its own. A clinical psychologist visiting Hopewell put it best that day. Bramble's power is not in being saved, but in being seen. He wears his difference where no one can look away. That kind of honesty is rare in humans. Later, she published a paper on the social mirrors effect, how seeing an animal's visible scars can spark more honest reflection and acceptance in groups that typically repress emotion. British boys, combat veterans, young women weighed down by social perfectionism. Lottie, usually uncomfortable with attention, began capturing these transformations in increasingly bold sketches. Her portraits, one of Bramble standing still as children pressed nervous hands to his side, another of a circle of adults all looking downward and inward, soon filled a small show on Hopewell's wall. She tried to explain it one day to a pushy journalist. It's not about Bramble making us better. It's about him letting us be broken and not being rejected for it. Back at the manor, around the kitchen table, veteran Mr. Byrne dropped by one evening. He handed Amelia a clipping from a London paper. "Wounded horse heals wounded hearts." He grinned. Who would have guessed this old place would lead the charge for kindness? Amelia smiled, eyes watering more than she liked. Kindness isn't charge, it's stubbornness. Like Bramble, just refusing to disappear. That night, as the house quieted and ash settled in the grate, Lottie fetched her battered sketchbook and tacked another page above the hearth. It wasn't pretty, just a rendering of Bramble's ruined eye, set deep in the mass of his scarred face. But he looked out at them without shame. Underneath, she scrawled a line from Byron. "There is pleasure in the pathless woods. There is rapture on the lonely shore. There is society where none intrudes, by the deep sea and music in its roar." The next morning, the phone buzzed again. A school in Manchester was looking to start therapeutic riding. A hospital in Oxford wanted to visit. And down in the paddock, Bramble stood steady, letting the anxious and the weary come close, neither ashamed nor afraid. Because sometimes the real miracle isn't hiding our scars. It's surviving them together and making space for others to do the same. If you'd walked the long, tree-lined drive to Kingsley Manor just a year earlier, you would have found locked gates, peeling paint, and the hush of a family afraid to hope. Today, the ancient iron gates, battered but bravely polished, were flung wide. The brass plate, freshly shined, gleamed in the late afternoon sun. Next to it, painted by Lottie in her spiky, bold script, "Stay and heal, open for all." Inside, the manor brimmed with new energy. It wasn't the grandness of old money, nor the nervous hush of survival, but a humming, urgent sense of purpose. Lottie darted from gallery to paddock and back, guiding a handful of city kids whose eyes lit with the wildness of open moor air toward Bramble's pasture. Her knuckles were ink-stained. There were paint flecks in her hair from all-nighters prepping for the show. "Hold your sketches still, he likes the colors," she called, with the confidence of someone who'd weathered storms and found herself stronger for it. Bramble, patched and powerful, grazed nearby, a quiet anchor in the green. Shiny-hooved but still battered, he sported a new halter decorated with charms from children who'd come through the Stay and Heal program. Bits of ribbon, tokens stamped with names, even a string of shells from a coastal boy who'd never seen a horse before last week. Veterans and parents, teens in therapy, teachers trailing after them, all mingled along the fences, changing the flavor of the place from lonely fortress to sanctuary. Amelia was at the heart of it, clipboard in hand, fielding questions about weekend workshops, therapy groups, and the next batch of grant paperwork. Her walk still bore traces of old injuries. Her face was more lined, her hair shot through with new grays, but she held herself as a woman no longer fighting for survival, but for legacy. She'd become something like a Northumberland legend, not for being untouchable, but for refusing to flinch when faced with cruelty or despair. That afternoon, in the main hall, Lottie's exhibition, Bramble and Scars, opened to a modest but noisy London crowd. Her drawings were raw, Bramble towering, uncertain yet gentle, Scar traced in harsh black crayon. A circle of hands, some small, some veined with age, all resting on the horse's mane. One canvas showed Amelia and Lottie, backs turned, standing together as storm clouds loomed beyond. For many, this art was uncomfortable, even challenging. But each piece sold quickly, raising funds for every shelter and trust on their waiting list. During the opening, a veteran with shaking hands asked Lottie why she drew Bramble's flaws so clearly. Lottie smiled, memory shining through. Scars are where the story is. They're proof you went through something and didn't let it end you. The man nodded and, for the first time in years, let his fingers brush the canvas, unashamed of his tears. Back at Kingsley Manor that same weekend, the Stay and Heal workshop was in full swing. Kids, city-born and local, led Bramble through trust exercises. Parents poured tea in the garden, trading exhaustion and hope. Eleanor Sharp, their vet, hosted a wounds and wisdom talk around a barn full of rescued animals. Volunteers, some veterans, some just neighbors finally willing to cross the boundary of suspicion, repainted the garden fence, whitewashing over old graffiti with jokes and blessings. Byrne, white-haired and sharp, taught the children to groom Bramble, telling tales of cavalry days and the horses that saved more lives than most men ever knew. Sir Oliver Grant, for months absent, finally sent word, an unsigned thank you for a scholarship spot his own nephew used after a breakdown. Even that belonged. Pain, shame, gratitude, the full messy truth, finally welcome. Later that evening, as the sun drop-kicked gold across the moor, Amelia walked the field with Lottie at her side. Voices echoed behind them, laughter, the thud of boots, the rattle of buckets. But here, beside Bramble, it was quiet. Lottie asked, "Do you think he knows?" Amelia ran her hand along Bramble's neck. He doesn't need to know. He just needed someone to stay. As dusk settled, Amelia looked out at the crowd. Old rivals, new friends, those still wary. She realized the fight for Kingsley was never about bricks, bloodlines, or bullies hiding behind a badge. It was about dignity, the willingness to walk beside what is broken and not demand it be perfect or easy to love. When the last of the guests left, Lottie pinned her final sketch by the barn door. It showed Bramble's head bowed low, a single child nestled in comfort against his scarred flank, and above them words painted boldly. Real courage isn't fixing the wound fast, it's staying beside it until it heals. So here's the legacy. At Kingsley Manor, doors stay open. Not everyone's happy all the time. Not Amelia, not Lottie, not even Bramble. But now the world knows to bring their hurts, not just their hopes. There is no aristocracy in lineage, only in how we guard the wounded and let the scarred shape what comes next. And listener, as the lights fade and the story ends, you're left with just one question. Who is your Bramble? And will you be brave enough to stay with them when the world would rather look away? If this story moved you, leave a like and follow our channel, because maybe together we can make room for even more lost causes to come home.